Mining is a big industry globally, and Canada is home to more than 75% of the world's mining companies, which operate in over 100 countries globally. In Latin America, 41% of large mining companies are Canadian. While mining is a big business and produces substantial revenues, Canadian mining corporations also generate widespread human rights abuses in the areas they operate. Although the international spotlight is fixed on many of the human rights abuses committed by Canadian mining corporations, the Government of Canada continues to fail at its obligations as a state under the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, both as a home and host state, as the government has continued to stress a voluntary approach to regulation. The third pillar of the UN Guiding Principles requires states to take appropriate actions to ensure through judicial, administrative, legislative, or other appropriate means that when human rights abuses occur within their territory and/or jurisdiction, those affected have access to effective remedies. However, the Government of Canada continues to provide ineffective and inaccessible judicial and non-judicial remedies for Indigenous women in Canada and Guatemala who are victimized by extractive industry-related sexual violence. There are two types of remedies that exist: judicial, which includes criminal and tort actions, and non-judicial grievance mechanisms, such as the national contact points of OECD member states, consumer complaint bodies, ombudsman offices, and national human rights institutions. Neither of these types of remedies hit the target because they are not accessible, nor are they effective for the majority of victims. Why not? Well, let's take a look. In Canada, only 5% of sexual assaults are reported each year. This means that 95% of victims already do not benefit from the availability of existing judicial remedies. Of those assaults that are reported, only 12% result in criminal convictions, with only 7% of those receiving custody sentences. It is even worse for Indigenous women in Canada. The rate of sexual assault against Indigenous people is almost triple that of non-Indigenous people. Indigenous women are the most vulnerable and at risk of experiencing the negative effects of the extractive industry. Sexual violence, substance abuse, and sexually transmitted infections from rape and sex trafficking are high for Indigenous women and girls living close to industrial camps. But why? Well, for a few reasons. First, law enforcement resources, the number of officers, and access to training are inadequate in many extractive communities, particularly in Northeast BC. This leads to higher rates of extractive industry-related sexual violence. Second, Indigenous women experience more sexual violence because of something called rigor culture. Rigor culture is defined as a mobile, mostly male workforce that is uninvested and disconnected from the local community and has been shown to increase violence against women. While some Canadian mining corporations have adopted corporate-level measures to address the problem of rigor culture, these measures appear to only be effective in the corporate workplace environment and not on the rigs. Inaccessible and ineffective judicial avenues exist for Indigenous women victimized by extractive industry-related sexual violence. The inaccessibility of the judiciary is also exacerbated by social, economic, cultural, and corporate barriers. Therefore, the judiciary is not an effective or accessible remedy for Indigenous women victimized by extractive industry-related sexual violence in Canada, and the Government of Canada fails its obligations as a home and host state under the third pillar of the UN Guiding Principles. Guatemala is home to more than 6.5 million Indigenous peoples, roughly 44% of the country's population. Guatemala is also a host state for several large Canadian mining operations. Guatemala has weak state institutions that lack the ability to effectively provide judicial remedies to victims. Specifically, crimes against women are severely underreported and only reflect a small percentage of the actual rate of gendered violence. From January to October 2014, there were 8,871 reported cases of sexual or physical assault, which led to 304 convictions. The Guatemalan government fails to adequately investigate and prosecute reported violence, which deters victims from reporting and re-stigmatizes and re-traumatizes those that do. Offenders that are given the minimum sentence of 5 years can commute their sentence by paying a nominal fine, severely limiting the punitive effect of the punishment. While statistics about extractive industry-related sexual violence are severely lacking due to underreporting, studies show that rigor culture is also pervasive in Guatemalan mining regions, which is shown to increase intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and rape. In January 2007, 11 Indigenous women in Guatemala were gang raped by mining company security personnel, police, and military members during a forceful eviction from their community to further the mining activities in the Phoenix Project, an open-pit nickel mine operated by CGN, a subsidiary of Sky Resources, which was acquired by Hudbay Minerals in 2008. In 2010, these 11 women filed a lawsuit in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice against the Canadian mining corporation Hudbay Minerals. As the parent company, these women argued that Hudbay should be responsible for the actions carried out by its Guatemalan subsidiary. The plaintiffs claimed that 2 eviction attempts occurred. The first happened on January 8th and 9th, 2007, at the request of Sky, mine security personnel employed by CGN, and third-party security personnel retained by CGN, along with police and military, carried out a forceful eviction of the community, during which they burned dozens of houses, fired gunshots, and looted the community. The second attempt came on January 17th, 2007, when these same security forces, police and military, gang-raped these 11 Indigenous women. The women argued that Sky knew or should have known that its acts, omissions, decisions, and directions would cause the kind of harm suffered by the plaintiffs, including catastrophic physical and psychological harm. The plaintiffs argued that Sky vigorously sought a forced eviction and support for the enforcement of their assertion of exclusive possession over the contested lands from the President and government of Guatemala and the Canadian ambassador and the Canadian embassy. The court, recognizing that these women would go without a remedy if standing was not given, confirmed that this case could be heard. While a positive recognition for these women, this litigation has been ongoing for 10 years, and Hudbay continues to operate in regions with vulnerable Indigenous female populations. Additionally, these are not the only Indigenous women in Guatemala victimized by Canadian mining corporations, so bringing a civil action in Canada is not an accessible or effective remedy to the majority of victims. This action highlights that the Government of Canada fails to provide effective and accessible remedies to victims as a home state, and the recognition by the court that no other remedies exist for these women further underpins the government's failure to adhere to the third pillar of the UN Guiding Principles.
Access to remedies are an essential component of addressing human rights violations. While judicial remedies do not always provide a comprehensive remedy, the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights identified non-judicial remedies as playing complementary and supportive roles to the judicial remedies, which remain at the core of access to remedy. Non-judicial mechanisms can be most useful in growing corporate-community relationships, and they can also be used to conduct fact-finding. Guiding Principle 31 outlines that a non-judicial remedy should include equal and effective access to justice, adequate, effective, and prompt reparation for harm suffered, and access to relevant information concerning violations and reparation mechanisms. In Canada, there are currently 2 national mechanisms to provide non-judicial remedies. First, there is the Canadian National Contact Point, which is an intergovernmental initiative designed to promote responsible business conduct. The Canadian National Contact Point, or this NCP, receives complaints and offers mediation to willing parties. However, this non-judicial remedy is not effective. Only 17 special instances have been brought through this initiative since its inception in 2000. Additionally, the NCP is not independent, suffers from long delays, does not make findings on whether companies have breached OECD guidelines, and is actually not mandated to provide a remedy. It merely offers the opportunity to facilitate dialogue between the parties. Second, we have the CORE, the Canadian Ombudsperson for Responsible Enterprise. The CORE was appointed in April 2019 and operates out of the Global Affairs Canada office. The CORE's mandate is to promote the implementation of the UN Guiding Principles by independently reviewing alleged human rights abuses. While relatively new, the CORE cannot be understood as an effective remedy. First, the CORE is not independent from government. The CORE and her staff are civil servants, and the office is situated within the GAC. And the CORE only has the power to offer mediation, to undertake reviews of information, which corporations provide voluntarily. Additionally, the CORE does not have any of the necessary powers to help communities to access remedies. So are these 2 methods even accessed by Indigenous women in Guatemala and Canada? The answer is no. However, it's not entirely bad news. There are examples of these initiatives being used by Indigenous women from other countries where Canadian mining corporations operate. For example, from 2006 onwards, 119 Indigenous women in Papua New Guinea living near the Porgera mine were raped at the hands of security forces hired by Barrick Gold, a Canadian mining corporation. The Porgera mine has been the notorious site of gang rape, beatings, and other atrocities since its operations began in 1990. Barrick Gold acquired its interest in the mine in 2006. Human Rights Watch and other industry groups described disturbing cases of extreme violence at the hands of mine security personnel. These victims were threatened with arrest if they tried to complain to other authorities, and more broadly, sexual assault and violence against Indigenous women is very pervasive in this region. In 2011, these women brought their grievances to the NCP with the help of the Porgera Landowners Association. The NCP took 10 months to find a qualified mediator, a completely unjustified delay. The mediation process didn't cover all the issues outlined in the request for review. Applicants had asked for outstanding matters to be discussed during the mediation process, but all parties were not willing to discuss these issues during the dialogue. Ultimately, Barrick Gold paid out remedy in the amount of 20,000 kina, which is approximately 8,500 Canadian, to only those 119 women. And the women were made to sign waivers that they didn't understand, so that they are now unable to take their cases through judicial avenues. Additionally, many women never even received compensation for the gang rapes that happened at the hands of Barrick's security guards. Barrick's remedy program closed in 2014. Shortly after closing that program, 11 rape victims, represented by lawyers from Earth Rights International, received settlements worth 200,000 kina using the judicial avenue. That's 10 times the amount received from Barrick Gold. This example specifically highlights that the NCP was not useful in facilitating dialogue that would result in a meaningful access to remedy. And this example further highlights that operation-level grievance mechanisms cannot be relied upon alone, at least not without a gender-based view to resolving the prevalence of violence against Indigenous women around mining sites.
Where does this leave us? Well, judicial remedies are not effective because sexual violence is severely underreported and has very low conviction rates, so this is not an effective remedy. Additionally, current non-judicial remedies also do not seem to serve as an effective remedy because the existing mechanisms created by the OECD and the Government of Canada do not even provide remedies to victims, only dialogue facilitation. So how can Indigenous women victimized by extractive industry-related sexual violence seek redress for their attacks? And how can the Government of Canada fulfill its obligation to provide such remedies? Well, we propose creating an independent gender inspector under the Corps. Before a Canadian mining corporation is able to operate in Canada or internationally, this gender inspector must visit the proposed site and report on any adverse impacts mining operations would have on Indigenous women in the region. If adverse impacts exist, the corporation has two options. In the first option, the corporation can present a proposal to mitigate gendered consequences and pay an amount for its permit plus an additional deposit to be held until the mitigating steps are completed. In the second option, the corporation can do nothing, and instead pay significantly more money for its permit, plus a yearly payment to support local programs. The additional money generated in option 2 would be funneled back into that specific community to provide social services to women at risk, such as healthcare, job training, education, and psychosocial supports. An independent organization, or the Corps, would be in charge of creating these programs, would monitor the prevalence of sexual violence in the region, and provide yearly reports on whether the gendered risks of the mining operation have increased or decreased. If they have increased, the yearly payments increase. If they decrease, as too with the yearly payment. So while Canada currently is failing to uphold its obligations as a host and home state to effectively provide accessible remedies for victimized Indigenous women, there is still hope. We argue that the Government of Canada should place more emphasis on providing effective and accessible restorative remedies to victims of extractive industry-related sexual violence in Canada and Guatemala, and that these remedies should be available alongside existing judicial and non-judicial remedies.